Thank you for joining Addressing Common Academic Integrity Violations. Our presenter today is Elisa Leggett. She's the Executive Director of Student Conduct and Academic Integrity here at USC. Elisa, I'll turn it over to you.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. I'm grateful that you are here because this is what some people consider to be an awkward conversation. Of course, in our office, it happens multiple times a day, but we just want to make sure that we take a lot of what can feel like the confrontational components out of this particular conversation, because there are ways that you can almost become almost an ally to the student, since it's a matter of forwarding a suspicion and you're not the decision maker. So it's all in the delivery. So today we are going to look at what a lot of the academic misconduct trends are. That way you kind of know where students make some compromises they shouldn't make, but looking at what you should be paying attention to is one of those main reasons why we want to cover that, and to articulate how do you want to respond to common violations. You can choose your own style, but we're going to talk about how to make sure that it doesn't erode the relationship that you have with your student. We're going to poll the audience, and you can either silence yourself, or you can put into the chat box, what are you most interested in learning about today? Maureen, that's a great designation also, because there's a lot more at stake if there's a responsible finding between graduate and undergraduates. It took a while for a lot of folks to accept that there are actually some sloppy scholarship options. So you're right, things that are problematic to the cornerstone of why we do what we do, and some things we're like, maybe that's sloppy scholarship. Yes, Carrie, 100%. And artificial intelligence. I think every presentation probably should have a little bit of artificial intelligence in it. Thank you for these. So some of our dated USC, it looks like it's old, but as you can imagine, we're not going to have our 22 to or 23 to 24 until we are part of the summer. And they haven't really changed that much. COVID, we had over 1,000 cases, and now we are back to what is a pretty steady median, which is around 500 cases per year. And you can see a 3% decrease. That means we are wildly consistent. Case resolution time is usually between 10 and 15 days. Students can decide they're not going to show up to the first meeting, which I know we're all nerds, and so we probably would never want to do that. Some of them, it's anxiety and they can't handle the prospect when there are other things going on. Sometimes we have questions about the report, and it takes a while to get information back from the faculty members. So there are a lot of different components to why it takes that long, and that is number of days. That's not business days. If that was business days, it'd be 3 weeks. That's not what this is. What this is exemplifying is once we get just past the midpoint of the semester into exams is where our spikes are. So right now we're still in kind of the cruising altitude for academic integrity cases, unless there is a large case. We have had a group me case that was 160 students in one case, but for the most part, this tracks with when students may feel the most pressure in their course. So final exams is when we have the absolute highest rate as far as a time period. As you can imagine, because we're not in class a lot in December, even though we get a lot of referrals, we don't quite have as many. And sometimes faculty members get their grades in and they just want to start their holiday, and so they don't turn in the academic integrity issue until it comes to January. But what this, again, the thing to know is that when you're getting closer to finals or the final project, that's when students are more likely to have a time constraint. And we know the number one reason that students cheat is time management and lack thereof. So some trends in academic integrity. Thank you for the person who said artificial intelligence. There's a lot that the CTE is doing and a lot that our office is doing to talk about talking to your students about what are the ways to use it in an academically advantageous way. Idea generating being, to us, one of the number one ways. And what are the ways when it really becomes a matter of using an unauthorized source, and when it becomes a matter of stripping away the culture and the life experience that people in a classroom bring? Our students have an intelligence that is far richer than artificial intelligence. And so discussing kind of the convenience versus the richness of learning from the purpose of your assignment. Students with lower self-efficacy sometimes are more likely to cheat if they don't believe they can do it. They don't believe that they're going to be successful no matter how much effort they put in. We've all given up on small and large things for those same reasons. And so I think in a lot of cases, our students who don't have the self-efficacy buildup of you can do this, sometimes even harder on themselves than what we would ever imagine. And so we want to reinforce to students that we want them to be successful, that we are here as resources to help them if they are struggling, that if they email us, and again, please put rules on it. If you're like, I don't want emails all the time, if you say, if you don't email me before I leave campus at 6:30 p.m., you're not going to get it until the next morning. Not because I don't care, but because I have kids and I have to feed them 3 times a day. Let students know when to anticipate a response, because if they're feeling like I don't understand this, letting them know, please reach out to me if you're struggling with something. They know, okay, I need to take another look at this before 6:30. Ghostwriting and contract cheating. And this is also very common with graduate students, and way more common than I had anticipated. And what we know is that, especially in other countries, the contract cheating and being able to purchase a paper, and not necessarily in a paper mill where you just go and find the topic, but you give your specific assignment to another author. And in other countries that don't have as developed economies as we do, if you have a PhD, you may get paid more by these companies that employ contract cheaters than you would in an average job, and you're an academic. And so many students, and I'm sure that many of you know this, students can decide, I want an A paper, that's $200. I want a B paper, that's $150. You can customize exactly what you are looking for. Just like in artificial intelligence, some of the platforms that we have looked at ask, okay, here's the topic that you just put in. Do you want it at a high school level, a college level, or a graduate school level of writing? Low recidivism rates. We don't have a lot of students who come through the academic integrity process. And this is so good for you to know as far as why there are a lot of positive reasons to report. We don't have a lot of students who come back. And I would say, again, surprisingly, we do have graduate students who come back. Yeah, I think there are a lot of pressures there. And messaging apps and social media make it much more difficult to know. And what we found is there was a licensure exam, and somebody went google.com looking for the social work licensure exam. Someone had posted it. So social work caught on. They're like, the number of high scores is drastically different than any other year. And so finally, they sent information out, and someone said, someone found it and then let other people know this is actually posted on this particular platform. What we're finding, though, is that instructors who leave their online tests open for a long time, students, if there's a GroupMe and there haven't been specific rules set up for that GroupMe, and you can say what your expectations are, we get cases where one person says, does anybody understand 17, number 17, or an answer is given and then distributed. So this makes it very easy to very quickly distribute. Now, if students are all in your classroom, you would see this, but this is a huge risk when it comes to online exams. And then high performing and professional programs, again, if we're looking at, if you do not get this certain grade on this final exam, and you want to be a pharmacist, all of your dreams and your 6 years of schooling may not pay off. So when students get to some of those desperation points, that's another time when we may see a student who would not normally consider cheating do something they wouldn't normally do. So if you have a student and you're like, I am suspicious there was an honor code violation, what are they going to do about it? What's the Office of Student Conduct going to do in academic integrity? And what we have to base it on is preponderance standard. So this is used in civil rights cases, and it really is, you could characterize it as a common sense approach. So there are some things that are just suspicious, but there's not really any evidence. And this happens in academic integrity far more than you walk into a student's residence hall and you find a beer. On this scale, that would be on the 5, or on the 6th thing, which is overwhelming information to support. Here's a screenshot of their door number and the can of beer sitting there. Easy. Academic integrity is not that straightforward. So sometimes if there's no information to support it, we go, that smells weird, that quacks like a duck, but we don't have information to support it, then it technically is not fair to say that student is responsible for a violation. So at the point where then you're saying, okay, when I looked at the back end of Blackboard, this student got a really high score and it was suspicious because their other scores aren't as high. That's, it's a little information. But then you go into Blackboard and you see, oh, they only spent 6 minutes on this test. The average amount of time that most students took in this administration of this particular test was 54 minutes. Now we're getting up to, oh, that's suspicious. We can't see where a student was utilizing an unauthorized source or cheating, but that is awfully suspicious. So now we're moving to the right, kind of up that scale. And their Respondus lockdown browser video showed them looking away from the screen for a 4-minute and 2-second period. Now we're getting information that keeps supporting it. So there can be suspicious things, and we're gonna work to find some of that information with your help. But it's a matter of piecing together the conglomerate. So it has to be which is more likely than not, and above the 50% percentage point. Okay, I have talked too much. Polling you all, what challenges do you anticipate if you had to address an academic integrity issue? Confrontation, so uncomfortable. Taking up the chain, yes. Margaret, for the last 20 years, when they have done surveys of faculty and why faculty members don't report, in many cases, it's a matter of not feeling the support of their chairperson. And we become your advocates in that scenario. And that doesn't mean that I'm telling you, oh my gosh, you've suddenly got all of your chain of command problems solved. But the worst thing we can ever do is implicitly show students that academic integrity isn't important. And so we're also happy to come to faculty meetings to say, here's why. Approaching the student with suspicion, yes. And Sophia, one of the, and this doesn't take the discomfort out of it, but one of the ways that I think we underestimate the position that you're in that's kind of a saving grace is, if you're suspicious, the honor code says that you've got to make a report. The first paragraph of the honor code says, anyone who has a suspicion about a violation of the honor code must make a report to the Office of Academic Integrity. And you can say, I don't know what's going to happen. I can tell you the steps, but a third person who doesn't know me, doesn't know you, is going to ask you questions separately. They're going to make a different decision, and this doesn't change yours and my relationship because I'm not the decision maker. I'm not saying you cheated. I don't know. I'm just saying, here's your test, and here's what the typical blah might have been. And if I see that, I have to make a report. So they're just going to contact you via email and then ask you some questions and show you everything that they've got that makes them worried. And you might be found not responsible. You might be found responsible. But if you need help preparing, or whatever that may be, we'll even help a student prepare for a hearing, hands down. Yeah, and Alec, that's the beauty of why we show that preponderance. Sometimes we're like, golly, y'all, and you hate this feeling, something happened, I can't prove it. So you may not have the evidence, and that's okay, because what we have also found is there is learning that occurs for students just in having to go, yeah, I didn't start that paper until 1 a.m. the night before. And then our discussion is, if you had to start over, let's just say we go back in time and it's a week before this is due, what would you do differently? And students aren't so good at that reflection component because their brains aren't done cooking. And so until we ask them that reflective component, it may be, and that same scenario is just as likely to occur again. Pushback from the student, yes. And the lovely thing, Maureen, is you can say, I'm here to answer questions, but I'm not a decision maker, so you don't have to worry about explaining everything to me. Sometimes when faculty members, and a number of faculty members do talk to the student in advance, and I'll tell you why that's advantageous too, but they admit right there to the faculty member, they're like, yeah, I did use Grammarly even when you said I couldn't. I did use this artificial intelligence platform, but I thought it was just giving me the outline, and I didn't think it was wrong to use the outline. And then you're pointing to your syllabus and going, well, you can't use that because this is what this says right here. And they're like, oh my gosh, that happens too. And it actually preserves a little bit of the goodwill between you because you're being transparent. When students get letters from us that say, hey, in your bio class, there's a suspicion of cheating and we want to talk to you about that. And they're like, why didn't my teacher talk to me? Well, because nobody likes confrontation. I can tell you why your teacher didn't talk to you, but they have more, well, yeah, she mentioned it to me before, so we talked about it, and I didn't want to say too much to her because I knew this meeting was coming up, or I told her what I had done. Again, the relationship is not severed at that point. Oh my gosh, collaborative and individual assignment. The more clear your collaboration, this ends up being an Achilles heel. The more specific your collaboration is it on the preparation and delivery? Is it on delivery only? Is it on preparation only? We have some collaboration examples on our website, but if it isn't clear to the student, then it doesn't feel fair for us to find the student responsible for a violation. If we're like, there's room for the interpretation that they gleaned. Now, do I think it was also advantageous to them? Boy, did they get lucky, but if it's not clear and it's reasonable, we want to tighten up that definition. I hope some of you too were able to look at the other attachments. There are a ton of great attachments, including Google your course code. I don't want you to do that while you're doing this because it'll devastate you and it'll be hard to focus. But to see how much of what faculty members have disseminated ends up on the World Wide Web. So this is what I was speaking about before. So this is the very beginning of the honor code. If you're really feeling like, oh, I don't want to talk to the student, talking about this in the first week of classes, or now's a good time because as we get closer to midterms, what studies also show is if it's right before a test and you're talking about the honor code and you're talking about academic integrity before a more high grade, that's a positive way, and it lingers with students. So if you're saying we're getting ready to go into this, please keep in mind if any member has reasonable grounds to believe an action occurred, they have an obligation to report. Who reports most of these? Obviously faculty. I don't want to report any of you. So please be sure that you have pride in your own work. Please, whatever you want to say that's kind of reflects your relationship with your students, let them know the worst day is the day I have a suspicion, and based on this I have to make a report and I'm typing like, oh, this hurts. Don't let it come to that. Other reasons, it really does assist in students learning. We would not hear academic integrity cases and conduct cases because we like to torture people. Let's make students miserable. We love working with students. We love helping them develop into better, stronger, more resilient people. And I would much rather, I mean, when we see the headlines and the amount of cheating and the amount of lying and the amount of cover up, we're like, God, I don't think we're going to solve the world's problems in the Office of Academic Integrity. But what if somebody had an honest conversation with them when they were 20 and said, you know, what's the value of integrity in your profession? Like, what, you're in an accounting program. Like, integrity is integral to why people come to you. And so we want to be able to help students learn while their ethical standards are still very malleable. And what we know is that between 18 and 22 developmentally, they're figuring out what that is. So let's give every possible advantage to them by making sure that they're not just getting away with things. We all know from either parenting or pet parenting, people will dip their big toe in the water. If it wasn't too cold, maybe they'll submerge their foot. This comes with so many human behaviors. So if they dip their toe in the water and they had a consequence, they're less likely to submerge their whole foot. Creating norms of integrity, letting them know, you know what, instead of spending time on how can I get away with this, let's do it right and do it right the first time. This is why it's important. Do you all, why do you think it might be important? Is it important? Let's talk through why this is important to this particular discipline at this particular school, and ensure due process protections are met. This protects you and protects the student. So we're working with the graduate program right now. They suspected a student cheated, and they never sent him to us. Until after they had said, we're going to sever our relationship with you. You can no longer be in this program. We need you to sign that you are withdrawing from the program. If that student files a grievance, y'all, and says they never proved to me that I cheated, I had no chance to defend myself. And of course, this scared graduate student's like signing away. And then they call us later and they're like, yeah, well, we want you to put a hold on for this. Like, we can't make sure your student doesn't register again. It's on good faith for you because we haven't given them due process. It protects you and protects them. And again, then you're not the one saying, I think you did this and we're severing a relationship. The Office of Student Conduct and Academic Integrity might say, there's enough information here that we think you violated it. So here's the repercussion. Guess what the repercussion is for undergraduates? An academic integrity online workshop with assignments that have personal recreation of whatever that episode was, of imagining what it would be like to be the instructor in that scenario, of looking at what are the resources that may have been applicable that could have been helpful if we could go back in time, of writing their own personal creeds and looking at their value systems and how they show their value system. Are we stoning people on the horseshoe? No, heck no. We are just saying, hey, I think this probably isn't typically you. How do we make sure it doesn't happen again? So responding, students observe how faculty members behave and what values you embrace. Not as much as their peers, true. And if it is not something that you discuss as important and you ignore it or you trivialize it, or you say, yeah, we know everybody does it, whether it's about alcohol, cheating, anything, we know our stats are not where we would want them to be. But once we say things like everybody does it, I know it happens all the time, trivializing it is the worst message we can possibly send, because it's like, so it must not be that important to enforce it. So talking about, yeah, it is important. So if I see it, I've got to report it, or else it's not fair to those students who are working their patooties off and who have stayed up for the last 5 nights until 1 a.m., which I hope you don't do, but studying to make sure that they put their best work forward on this. I want to make sure I'm standing up for that particular student. So yeah, if I have a suspicion, no, I'm going to have your back if you've been working your butt off. Okay, what issues have you encountered in your classroom? Fully, yep, against the code. And we do individual class presentations to our international students during orientation and our IAP, because there's so much room for it being lost in translation there. It is a violation to sign someone else in, and we're gonna go over exactly that. And copied work, thank goodness our school pays for Safe Sign, so we have some ability to do that. Copied work is much easier to detect than what we were talking about related to contract cheating, where it's its own original work, and so then it's much harder to detect. An option for that is to ask students to write a paragraph or two in the beginning of class, like the first or second day, to say, this is about me, this is about my interest in this class, this is what I'd like to get out of this class, because then you, one, get to know your students better, which is the most important part, but two, then you have a bit of a writing sample. And so I don't think I would tell my students I was doing that, but I wouldn't be adverse to it either. Because I'm like, here, listen, I believe in academic integrity. And if it's suspicious, I want to have a sample. I want to see this. I feel like I know how the student writes, and this isn't it. But me feeling like I know isn't as good as really knowing. And I really know if I have your writing right in front of me. Ah, Margaret, yes. And students don't ever seem to capture that that's problematic. I don't know if this is generational. I think we have to say, I'm giving this assignment for a specific reason, and this is what I want you to get out of it. These are my learning outcomes. And so if you're just copying from something you've already done, you aren't achieving those learning outcomes. So that's why it's important to me that you're not just rinse and repeating on something that you have already done. And that's an interesting one when retaking the course, because we get it when a student is reusing it for a different course for convenience. And yes, I think we have to say you cannot use previously generated work even when it is your own. And Maureen, God, we have got to use seating charts, and we have got to scramble questions because it's just way too easy, to pick up answers. And if I could eliminate multiple choice questions after doing academic integrity work for this long, I would, because that is the easiest possible way that students can cheat on a test, especially in real time. Yes, the issues with academic integrity, and with artificial intelligence, and there are platforms for detection, but what we have found is that common sense is a pretty good detector too, especially the more specific your questions are and the more experiential your questions are. That's where artificial intelligence has some limitations in Spanish composition. And we have certainly, one of the most useful things that our languages department teaches us when it comes to a suspicion of cheating on especially Spanish exams is that a certain vernacular or a certain dialect wasn't taught, or that word for that meaning wasn't taught, helps us exponentially, where an instructor says, I don't teach it and I know that that's not in the book. Yes, Atina, I would love to speak with you afterward too, because there are certainly some places for grace, but when the problem doesn't seem to be resolving, we want to have a much more in-depth conversation with that student. Great question. Do you know which platform is best for cheating? Not necessarily. They're all on algorithm, with, of course, artificial intelligence is too. So I don't know that one is exponentially better than another. It being very vague, it not answering the prompts, it using language that is above, which we see language is above what the student would typically use. Finally, in one hearing, I had to ask a student the definition for a word, and she didn't know it, and I knew she wouldn't, because there were lots of words like that. And so I was worried that this is not the student's writing level. How to prove students use, that is one of our most difficult problems right now. But again, the combatant to that isn't necessarily figuring it out. It's writing an assignment that is very difficult to get a quality artificial intelligence product from. And so, like I said, CTE and our artificial intelligence offered through CTE also are good ways we look at how do you generate assignments that are very difficult for artificial intelligence to be able to give you a good answer to. The question is, do you find that proctors for remote online tests are effective? Yes, because at least they will scan all of those videos and be able to say, here are the ones where we saw a lot of looking around. And then we as humans look more closely at it and can ask the student what was happening here. So yes, I absolutely believe in ProctorU and other remote online testing. Respondus Lockdown Browser, 100%. The difference between artificial intelligence assistance and artificial intelligence cheating, even a year ago. So all of this started exploding 2 Decembers ago. So there was an NPR story about a Wharton Business School instructor, and in the first week he said, we're going to use artificial intelligence right now, because we're beginning with the end in mind, to look at what your topics for your final project would be. And I want each group to come up with 50, which is a little excessive, maybe 20 topics that you could explore using these key terms, which are the concepts we're going to be covering in this course. So that brainstorming, things you and I wouldn't think of, where we're like, I just need a good way to do this. I wonder how we could mind map that. So if you're mind mapping and you're using artificial intelligence to find other kind of directions, fantastic. It's going to uncover things we wouldn't have thought of. If we're saying, here's my paper topic, create a presentation, create an advertisement, create a job description, and then a student turns that in, that's when it's excessively problematic. Grammarly, sometimes students use without even knowing it, but typically Grammarly will give you edits of your work and you can accept, but there is a way that students can accept, and it accepts all, and it changes much of the writing, like an entire sentence phrase at a time. And we have had students that are a little bit surprised that they were being sloppy and rushed and they just hit accept, and then they had a wildly different paper that wasn't just correcting a misspelling. Yeah, ProctorU or Respondus, and CTE also has a lot of resources on those, and it's how to use them. Their website and our website explains how to use all of these platforms. I'm so glad that you're asking that. Yes. Common concerns. So this gets back to why people don't want to report. Feeling guilty that your report will critically impact the student's future goals. What we hope is in a good way. Again, we wouldn't do this if it was just torture. So students aren't kicked out for this, y'all. First offense, heck no. If we had a graduate student who plagiarized his PhD, I did remove him. Here's the thing, we're not at that level. Believe it or not, for conduct and academic integrity combined, there are usually 30 to 40 suspensions the entire year of our 36,000 students, and that's for multiple offenses. Here's the issue though, we're going to stair step that justice. So if at first it's a typical cheating offense, we're going to use that workshop that we talked about. Second, we might have a transcript notation. There is an appellate process to get that transcript notation off. So it's going to say student cheated in this particular class, or had an honor code violation, not going to say cheated. And then there's more education. Usually you're getting to the third offense before the likelihood that you are going to be kicked out. We're going to give it everything we've got before we get to disrupting your ability to progress. Concern that we're going to find the student not responsible. Those are the best days, y'all, because sometimes I'm like, God, you are towing this line. I'm looking at this 50% and you're like at 45. What's your takeaway? And the student will be like, I can't look around if I'm on an online test and I've got to be in my own room with a sign that says, do not disturb, because I'm in an online test. And then my roommate came in and I'm talking to my roommate. Now that's suspicious, had to be reported. And she's like, I wasn't even talking about the test. Well, if you put a sign that says don't disturb. So there are some not responsibles. Those are great. The student didn't cheat. That's what we want to be the answer. Lack of time to pull together a report. I promise you, we're going to spend triple the time on it that you are if you can just give us what you've got. And we're going to talk about some of those components of the report too. And concern that the student will negatively impact your course evaluation. We can't control that component of it, but here's the thing, you can control your delivery of, I'm worried about this. Do you see why I'm worried? It doesn't even matter what their answer is. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to send it for somebody else to decide. But you're going to get an email, so just watch for it because I don't want you to miss the appointment. They are not mean people. They are there to say, hey, tell me about what happened and tell me about how you prepared this. So what are our policy violations? Pretty straightforward. The majority that we get are cheating. And so this can be cell phone use. If every class policy, classroom rule was you're not allowed to have a cell phone out, you've got to have it underneath a desk in a far, far away land, that would solve so much, because usually we never know what the student is looking at. Some faculty members are assertive enough, they're happy to walk around and walk right up to the student and say, can I please see what you're looking at, because you're not permitted to have a cell phone. If it's granny, then that just really helped the student out. It's just a violation of a classroom rule. If it's a website with the content of the test on it, then you've just made it a very straightforward case and the student knows exactly what to anticipate because there's a red-handedness to that. Collaboration. Thank you to the person who brought this up before. Highlighting, this is why I'm suspicious that there was collaboration. When I ran it through SafeAssign, and this happens a lot on labs too, labs are going to come up with a high SafeAssign ratio for likeness because all of the outlines of labs are the same. So same language, hands down. But sometimes there will be an odd way that something is measured, or it's greater than, less than something, which isn't typically how you structured that lab. And so there's something that's weird, and maybe a student had copied it from a previous lab that was online and then distributed it. Those one-offs are usually, unfortunately, a sign of collaboration that wasn't permitted. And cheating websites, and this is a good one for the person who brought up linguistics. When a student's level of knowledge seems to be inconsistent with either the course content or what they have previously turned in, the likelihood is they could have paid for someone to, either from a paper mill or paid for someone to generate an original assignment for them. Plagiarism, second. Again, plagiarism is hard to find, harder to find responsible because we need to find what the original work was. So whereas if we can't find the original manuscript, it's much more difficult to find that preponderant standard of information that it's definitely plagiarism. But there's so much out there for students that in many cases we can find it. Shaniko, what are you thinking?
Okay, I was just wondering about, I'm sitting here working on Adobe and it has its own AI beta test. And I
Yes.
noticed Grammarly has this new beta test. Copilot has its beta. So I know even for me writing and the students writing, there's going to be some instances of AI being injected where you don't know if it's cheating or not. Is there
Yes.
a format for like citing? Because I know when I was working with Adobe today, it says, you have to cite, this was generated by AI. Is
Yes.
there any citing format for individuals who, like, I was reading a Grammarly article that someone did post it, and it said it was unintentional or something,
Yeah.
plagiarism. Is there guidance for the teachers to provide to the students that if they are using AI and they inadvertently, select, oh, this sounds better than what I would have thought, not knowing that it's plagiarism? And I
Yeah.
just want a little more clarity on that. Thank you.
Yes. And last February, when we started our artificial intelligence presentations, that's what we said. We're like, you know what? If you're using it properly and you're using it for brainstorming generation, if you're using it for asking it what it would have written about, and you've got your paper and you're just saying, hey, were there things that I should have explored that I didn't? And comparing, just cite that you used it like other sources. And so on our website for Office of Academic Integrity, we have an artificial intelligence section, and it shows how to do citations. And I think that's one of the best parts, is because we don't want students to be like, I'm using AI. Let's talk openly about it. Let's say, if you're using it for this, here's your go-to. Because I think Purdue OWL and those things are not going to necessarily show you that, even though those are websites that we 100% would recommend. But I think we have an APA and MLA style for it. There was a lot of question at the beginning, and this is why your question is so good, because how do you cite an algorithm? How do you cite this just vastness? But we're just doing the best we can. We just want to make sure that if you used it, you're saying, I use this. And so please feel free to pull those and let your students know when you've used it properly. Yeah, you should be noting this was a source. 100%. Great question. Oh, thank you. Poor paraphrasing. Sometimes this is where we get into the person at the beginning who noted, how do we know when it's kind of sloppy scholarship? When most of the paraphrasing has been good, but there's some poor paraphrasing, one citation left out. I can't imagine. Sometimes I don't know who we were raised by, but that's scary as heck to me if an instructor had found that, but it happens much more frequently. And I think because there's so much cutting and pasting that we didn't do that college students do now. But if it is consistent, yeah, we want to examine the Safe Assign report. There is no harm in just putting everything through Safe Assign, having students upload their papers and their assignments to Blackboard so that it can be almost automatic for you. Copying and pasting, what we're talking about in the nuances of Safe Assign, again, goes back to those labs. So you're not looking, so Safe Assign, of course, will give you a color-coded report compared to the original manuscript. And if you're saying that it's the structure of a lab, that's a lot of it, then you're not as worried. You're looking at what is, the methodology is still, we could argue both sides of that, but what's the language that they're using? Is it just one thing that's switched, but it's the exact same language? That's where we're getting closer. And we never want to say, oh my gosh, Safe Assign showed an 81% likeness, so there must be cheating. No, we're going to look at what is the exact likeness. Why is that occurring? Is it occurring in one section and then the rest is good? It's important to have more than just one data point. We want to try to triangulate that data point. And asking questions related to high-level concepts or terms if you're suspicious of this, that a student did some copying and pasting because it was higher than, again, their level of understanding, or you're in a 101 course and you're like, this just wouldn't necessarily be. Asking them, telling them about your suspicions, and then asking them a high-level kind of processing question about it that is commensurate with the why you were suspicious. And again, in those, you don't want to ever be crappy about it, but that's when students realize, okay, I know why this is happening. We hope and process it as. The Office of Academic Integrity sees this every day, and so they're probably going to have some concerns as well. And ghostwriting, if you utilize Google or check Course Hero, sometimes we will take a section of a paper, put it into Google, and then we can see where it has come from before. Course Hero, there are some free options to these, but again, if you send them to us, we're going to be checking some of those sites, but it also isn't hard. If you're suspicious and you start doing maybe 5 minutes of research on it, you're likely to find something, which is sad. Every time we find it, we're like, ah. So, group question here. So, place your fingers on the keys, think through. You notice two students who have similar, unique wrong answers on your test. What information do you include in your report to the Office of Academic Integrity? Margaret, yes. If you had a seating chart, show us the seating chart. Number one right answer, seating chart, yes. Many of you have years of experience, or maybe you have a class of 200. Students are like, well, that's just what I understood to be, the answer. But then when Kelsey writes, I have taught this course for 9 years every semester, so 18 sections. This is the first time that anyone has answered in that way, and 2 students in the same section did. What? That's critical. I wouldn't know that from the report. So tell us what made you go, that's weird. That has never happened before. Or I've taught this many times. I have 300 students and no one else said that. And that's an obscure reference because, good. The instructor sample answers and why these answers may be deficient. It's different from the resources, the study materials that you issued to them. Yes. I love this, Maureen. Pictures of both right answers, the right answer and what was unusual about the wrong answer. Yes. The fact that, there's a trajectory issue to that. Yep. What Google says the answer is, if it's also wrong. Yeah. Because it's going to be believed and not double checked in some cases. An example of a usual answer. Great. This is excellent. And again, the seating chart, I can't even tell you. Sometimes it's been a last minute addition and it made everything so clear. These are great. So falsification this is where we're getting into signing students in. So if attendance is part of a student's grade, that is when it becomes an issue. I hope that is the case for you and you got the ability to make your own decision. But what we want students to know is that their participation and being in the classroom and being alive and, trading ideas is critical to the educational experience, and you value their contribution. So that's why you have a rule about attendance. I mean, I know the university does, and some people just go, they're on their own, they can do what they want, they're grown. Well, yeah, how disconnected would you feel if they're like, I don't care if you come or don't come? I mean, I probably love it, but some are like, we learn from each other. You all know we learn from each other in the classroom. 18-year-olds learn an immense amount from each other. So letting them know that that's of value to you. And so that's so important that you want to do everything to incentivize them being there. So if they say this person's here when they're not, and they're getting academic credit for it, because if you miss more than 3, you lose points, that blatantly is falsifying information. So attendance documentation, number one. There are also ways to do random checks. So through Top Hat and random, a lot of easy ways that are online, even if it is a note card and everyone has one note card and they do their minute paper. Here's my name, here's what I still have a question about in the class, and here was the most salient thing I learned today. Now you've got also name tents if you have a smaller class. The name tents that are still left there, if online that person signed in but you're looking at their name tent, there are ways that if you have TAs that you can check that. That's a lot more work than these. And this is how in classes where you're required to be there, instructors have looked at the faces online and people logged in and been like, this is not the same as the number that are supposed to be here of faces I'm seeing. So I know people are logging in for other people to get the points. Yeah, that's paying important attention. Lying behaviors, if you're suspicious that a student is lying to you, sometimes this manifests as they send you a file and it can't be opened. It says it's corrupt. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. But now it's the next day, so they've had an extra day to complete something. I think just explaining person to person, this is why I gave the specific instruction on how to do it. The other 64 people did it and were successful. Creating a fake doctor's note. I don't want to even go breaking your hearts. Y'all, there are businesses that create fake doctor's notes. You get a subscription, like $60, and you get a year of being able to say, this class, this whatever, this physician from this city. Terrible. Feel free to use the ombudsperson if you think something is suspicious. We'll call doctors' offices. There are some HIPAA protections, but they will usually be very open to say, because it's not a violation, this person isn't even a patient. And that's all we need. That happens more often than you would believe. If you're suspicious and it looks weird, sad thing is it probably is. Complicity. This is where we're getting into GroupMe. Many of our complicity charges are people who were part of a GroupMe, an answer was circulated, and this is a terrible scenario. Dear people, we know that, again, 64 people saw this answer. We don't know who used it, who had already answered, who, whatever, and we're going to cross-reference that. This GroupMe was sent at this time. This many people had already completed the test. If it's open for 12 hours, now we've got a real problem. If you've got a test online, make it open for the amount of time your class period is. Make it, because what somebody can do is, and if you've been in the other sessions, you've heard this, they can easily ask a Chegg tutor a question and get it back in as little as 15 minutes. If it's only open for an hour and 15 minutes, there's not time to really get academic advantage from that, even if a student would compromise and do that. But if it's open forever and people are like, what else do we need to study? What else is on it? They can't do that if it's open for a limited amount of time. So save yourself. Keeping it open for a longer period of time for a student with a registered disability, yes, you can change that on Blackboard. You can say for the student, it is open for an hour and 45 minutes instead of an hour and 15. They're a student with a registered disability. So sharing work electronically or in person, if you find that in your class, in many cases, it's a person who had the class fall of 2022 and fall of 2023. If you run it through SafeAssign, it's going to pick that up too. It's not just going to pick up students that are currently enrolled, and so that's a big advantage. Both students may have some culpability. Even if we determine that the student whose original work isn't culpable, we want to talk to them about it, because in many cases they're like, yeah, well, they were struggling, so I just gave them a copy of my work. That's dipping a toe in the water. So it is on the spectrum of cheating behaviors. It is at the lowest, but it's still important to go, you know what? Now you're here with us, which is not probably where you want to be. I know you didn't tell that person explicitly to use it. They didn't explicitly say, I'd like to look at it because I'm going to use it. But that's not outside of the realm of possibility in a way that both of you probably didn't recognize. And in large group concerns, we're happy to come in and what we have found worked. Here's what works a lot. The faculty member says, we have 64 names of people who are on the GroupMe. Someone or multiple students have come forward to say that this was circulated on the GroupMe. If you let me know, yeah, I did it, or I used it, or yes, I saw it, you're not going to get charged, and we'll help you write that. Otherwise, it's a typical conduct and academic integrity hearing that you're going to have for a complicity charge. So there will be some grace given to people who come forward themselves. And that's how we want students to make decisions, right? So we're happy to also say, in a large group class, let's figure out where we think it started, who said, oh my gosh, yeah, I looked at it, and then immediately to the group. That's going to help us determine too. And again, you can talk about, have a GroupMe in case you guys want to get together to study. They're probably going to do it anyway, and let them know. But if for some reason somebody compromises this and puts test answers or things that aren't permitted to be shared into the GroupMe, everyone who is still on that GroupMe could be in the Office of Academic Integrity. So that one person, don't get every single classmate in trouble. And I know that feels crappy. Wait, I'd have to go to OAI. That's why it's a terrible scenario. We don't know who used it and who didn't. We'll never know. So it's awful to talk to students and be like, I know, but nobody's telling us who did it. So now everybody's, under suspicion. Talk to them about the difficulty of that scenario and to please not abuse the GroupMe. So social study sites. One of the handouts or attachments to this presentation is kind of a tutorial on all of these and how to go through and see if your tests, your assignments, your homework, and please know if you're using homework from the book, all the answers are on every one of these. So each of these sites is a subscription-based site, and there are incentives for students to upload information from their instructors to these sites. So as we have said, if you give out your test and give it back to them and don't recollect it, or don't just post the answer so that students can kind of recall, oh yeah, that's about this and this and this, you're posting what's wrong and what's right. That can just be immediately uploaded to all of these, and then a student has access to even more material that's been uploaded by other students from other instructors. So please check these sites and see. Well, not on GroupMe, obviously. Quizlet's not as offensive. A lot of these faculty members have been absolutely horrified. If you're not changing your test every year, yikes. Yes, Maureen, I think that's why they exist. They are a verifier. So if a doctor's note, especially if it's for more, than a week or so, there's got to be a vetting process. And so the Office of Student Advocacy is there to be that on faculty members' behalf. This is a really interesting article about the integrity arms race, and it's saying, if we just spend all of our time trying to create detectors, like we're never going to catch up, because all of those sites I just showed you are making money on providing previous academic work to current students. We're just a public school trying to do our best. There's no way that we're going to be in this arms race and we have a chance of winning. So that's why part of the presentation about belongingness in the classroom and about techniques to get students invested and involved during class time, to write assignments that are difficult to use artificial intelligence for. Getting ahead of it is better, that prevention component, than trying to enforce it. We're here for the enforcement component, but simply ignoring it, not addressing it, not saying why we think it's an issue, and just thinking, oh, there's always going to be some fringe students who do that, that's an answer that is making you part of the problem. So we've got, if people believe, the beauty of having an Office of Academic Integrity on this particular campus is reputationally that's excellent. Many schools don't have that. And so we love that, because when people are like, oh my gosh, isn't it a party school? Not completely, I would know, because we do conduct, but we also take academic integrity seriously, and by things like Safe Assign have staff members who investigate this every single day because we want to help students be better when they leave. So effective reporting tips. If you're not sure, and some of you are like, yeah, I don't really want to report this because I don't know if this is meeting that threshold, call us. We'll talk through it with you. Every single college has a college liaison to the Office of Academic Integrity. If you don't know who that is, call us and we'll tell you, or ask your chair or dean and they will know. In many cases, it is an associate dean. Report shortly after terminating if there's a concern for a couple of reasons. Students don't feel like it's very fair if now they're like, oh my gosh, you waited till exams and now I'm stressed and this is what's happening. That does feel bad. Or we have a report from November and it's innocent because sometimes things get away from us, but those students are like, why are you just asking me now? Well, because I got it 2 days ago. So then if they say, well, I don't really remember, I don't know. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, but I can't assume that they do because now we're at 3 months past. So if you have a suspicion, please report it and let the student know the same day, or we usually, by the time we get it, open it within a day or two. So that's kind of the window. Use objective language. Whomever in this wonderful group said, yeah, people go straight to the top. If your language is, yeah, I've been suspicious of this cat before, that's not what you want going to the president. But also because it starts to sound, if we're not using objective language, like we may have a biased position toward that student. If our job is to make sure we make an unbiased decision based on the objective information, we're at a disadvantage to start with if it sounds like there's bias in the process before it's even begun. So a student doesn't learn if they're like, you've been against me this whole time. Well, look at how that faculty member described me. Also, if you're like, I've let it go before, but now it's become a problem. The student's like, what? And we're like, well, we don't have any reports before. So that can't be used as information that gets you a higher level of outcome or a more severe outcome, because that's not fair because the student didn't have due process in that. So letting something go does a favor neither for you nor the students. And then attaching supporting documentation. So your syllabus and your assignment instructions, hands down, providing the test and the safe assign report and your analysis. This is why this is suspicious. I have a master's in education. I do not understand why that's suspicious in physics. We get a lot of computer programming reports. And so I don't understand that if this one thing is out of place, that would have changed the whole outcome of that statistical run. So those are the things, talk to me like I'm 5. Those are the things that the student knows and that you know, but that are key pieces of information we have to understand. We love talking to faculty members about some of the simple ways and simple changes that you can make that just make it less likely. Good teaching, knowing their names, creating interesting assignments, giving them choice in how they date their assignment. So if it's on this topic, what are the different ways that they can do it based on different types of learners? Also in human resources, I think they have some conflict management courses. But if you want to call me and say, how do I talk through this with the students? I just let them know, I'm not submitting this because I believe you cheated. I'm submitting this because I have a suspicion. I've taught this class for 10 years and nothing like this has ever happened before. And I don't want to dig in. I would rather somebody else make that decision, and then they'll just let us know what the outcome is. And you can talk to somebody who is not emotionally invested in this class or emotionally invested in you, because that makes it hard to be unbiased. No, the first offense, it is harsher, yes, for graduate students. And I think we all probably can understand why those stakes are much higher. It depends on what it is. Like I said, if it's dissertation or it's something that is directly related to that degree completion beyond even just a course assignment, it can be suspension for a first offense. It is unlikely though. So we have an outside vendor who does a very high level academic online course also that we give to graduate students, because it's a little bit of a stretch for undergraduates, but it is much more philosophical about integrity and about systems and about why things exist the way that they do. And so most students may get a penalty on their transcript, which again, there is an appellate process for after a year or two. So they may get a transcript notation and that academic education, the academic integrity seminar. And so they have individual, just as we do, individual instructors who give individual feedback just as we do. So it's not busy work, and we get great feedback on both courses. I know the perception that I don't want to report because I don't want to ruin their lives. I'm like, I don't either. I don't know who started it 50 years ago that we're going to ruin their lives, but no, we want them to learn and grow, always. Yes, I appreciate you asking that, Shaniqua, also because anytime that we're talking about academic integrity and the ways that we are looking for it, I think that is another dissuasion. So if, especially with freshmen who I think are the least practice on proper citations, showing them, here's your safe assign report in there. I can't remember at the moment. It is not difficult to show students how to run it themselves, but, and then submitting that, not that you have to look at all of those, but so that you can then especially work with the students who had a lot of trouble. Because again, if a student really is unclear on how to cite, this is going to recur. And that's the last thing we want. So yes, helping them understand, here's how to check yourself, and here are other tips. Color code. If this is article from James, color code it in blue. Blue and blue is James. Anderson is yellow and yellow. What is pink and pink? So that there are, ways that they can identify, have I, if I'm using this particular component, have I put that in my citation page? Thank you all, and thank you for your participation.